guys, this video will show you exactly how to transcend social conditioning so that you can really attract what you want. I'm going to show you ways of identifying these patterns that may have control over our life and how we can become transparent to it so that we really get what we want. Welcome back to another video. My name's Aaron and I help people expand their consciousness. Now in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some ideas of some stuff that I'm actually currently learning a lot more about. Now a lot of this channel is understanding the practical side of the law of attraction, understanding how we can fit these ideas into our lives to really get profound differences. But this one's going to be understanding a more universal type idea of social conditioning and how that subconsciously and unconsciously controls much of our life experience. Now the reason I'm making this video is because I think that this is an unconscious thing that just people aren't very aware of, and when you become aware of it and you're able to really identify the social conditioning and its like kind of grips over how it pulls us in our life, then we can really consciously decide how we prefer to think, how we prefer to feel, and then we can move in the direction of what we want. Now, as I say in many videos, it's our beliefs that create our reality, and with social conditioning, that also has a grip over what we believe to be true because there's always a strong desire to remain consistent and similar to other people. So first off, let's understand what social conditioning really is. Now, social conditioning is a certain type of rules or norms that's considered acceptable by society. So we could think of this as social conditioning maybe to look a certain way, to work a certain way, to get a certain type of job. Social conditioning has its grips over, the way we think is acceptable to us and other people. And many times if we act any different compared to that social conditioning, sometimes we won't be accepted by other people. Sometimes even becoming awakened and learning more about how reality works can be something that's frowned upon. And it's not necessarily in the general grips of what social conditioning is, and therefore there sometimes can be shame and guilt there, because then we look, if you've become aware that your thoughts are influencing your experience and people are judging you, it's like that negative experience is coming from the social conditioning pull of other people and how other people think. Now, the first part of understanding social conditioning is that everybody is socially conditioned at some level. Even if the ego wants to say, and I want to say, I'm above social conditioning, I transcended social conditioning, it hasn't actually happened. There's some level of social conditioning in absolutely everything that we do. And this is kind of the way I think about it. I'll kind of share with you my thought process of how this works and how we can apply this in our own life. Think of it in the form that, quantum physics is showing us that thoughts have an electromagnetic type reality, right? We might physically not be able to see all thoughts, but they still exist at a certain level. Now, when we think thoughts, we are putting a frequency out there. We can think of this in the form of vibration. We're putting out a resonant frequency out there, and those thoughts have some etheric type reality. Now, I know this sounds a little bit woo-woo and esoteric, but just follow me along here because you'll understand it at a deeper level. Now, think of it like we each have our own individual reality that we are choosing, that we are selecting, and based on our choices, and our thoughts are adding momentum to that in a certain way. And then what happens is we expand ourselves out of our own ego, and it goes more to maybe a community or a society type standpoint. Then maybe you expand that out to a government and then the world. Now think of it, there are energy grids around the whole planet that we may not physically be able to see with our eyes of us feeding into certain ideas. Anytime we watch the news, we are feeding into that reality. And that's why many times, as I think it was Mother Teresa said, the best way to defeat crime, drugs, and all of these things isn't to actually fight it, because when you fight it, you let it continue to run itself out. You give it energy. Whether you resist it or persist it, you're giving it energy. The most powerful way to transcend any level of social conditioning is to first off simply be aware of it, and then to neutralize it, to observe it. In the same way I share a lot with you guys the idea of neutralizing our thoughts by observing our thoughts, it's the same way when it comes to this. Be aware that it's there. Don't necessarily label it, be aware that it's there though. And we can be aware of how this social conditioning happens at so many different levels. We have social conditioning when it comes to our government, whether we are Republican or Democrat or even a part of the system. And when we have these kind of perspectives, we're feeding into the system and it has some grip over us whether we realize it or not. And this also goes when it comes to the idea of sports teams. We're putting energy into something. I'm not saying that any of these have to be inherently bad or good. We can still enjoy sports teams, we can still enjoy these things, but be aware of how our thoughts are interlocking in that grid of how people think. So if we get ourselves tied up in certain type of events that happen, we are taking on the conditioning, the momentum of that energy within us, and that is becoming a part of us. So think of it, if you are watching the news and you're seeing all these negative things that are happening all over the world, that is conditioning you to see those patterns and to become a part of that reality, to become more of it. Now, this is why observing it, you can be aware of it, but neutralize it. Don't think of it as good or bad. Don't think of it as, oh, I need to block myself from that. I need to, really protect myself and shield myself from it. Be aware that it's there. Now, I'm going to go a little bit deeper here with something with you guys, and I want to talk about more of a universal understanding of how our thoughts work. And this might seem very esoteric, but I just want to share it with you guys because it's something I've been thinking of, and I really believe it has a lot of power. When we see songs, for example, maybe it's a rap song or maybe it's some type of, any type of song in general, what is happening is anytime there's a song that's a big hit or just a song in general that thousands or millions of people listen to, the idea is people are linking up with those songs with the thought forms, and that is influencing the grid. And in a way, what's happening is we are adding momentum to that reality. Now, this means that when you hear rappers talk about their money, their cars and all of these things, at a certain fundamental level, now this is going to sound weird, but I believe that what is happening is people that are singing along to the songs, that are seeing their music videos of them successful doing all of these things, are adding energy to that reality and making it something that gains more and more momentum. Now, on the other side of this, if you have somebody, for example, that's being shamed, that might be negative energy that's being sent towards them. That might be negative energy that's creating that kind of like a vortex around them. Now, I know these words sound very esoteric, it sounds very woo-woo and weird, but I've always felt like when it comes to these songs and these movies and bringing awareness on certain issues, like even though awareness can be a good thing if you are conscious of it, it's important to understand that these things are kind of gripping us into certain directions if we are not aware of them. Now, this means that the most powerful way for us to get rid of social conditioning is to simply observe the forces of how it might be pulling us in certain directions. So being aware of its grip anytime you feel triggered. Anytime you feel triggered, know that a lot of times that has to do with social conditioning. If you are out and someone's talking about Trump or this or that, and you feel triggered, you're still feeding into that social conditioning whether you realize it or not. And it might be that you are fighting it or agreeing with it, whatever it is, you are still buying into that social conditioning, and it is having some type of momentum within your energy field or within you that is steering your life in a certain direction. And that social conditioning, it can be powerful, and that's why it's important to be aware of what that social conditioning is, because as you are aware of what that social conditioning is, then you can really decide to branch outside of it, because the thoughts that we have will always be equal to those perspectives. And if we have that unconscious perspective of social conditioning, if we are just kind of like the herd type mentality, a lot of herd mentality of us just doing what everyone else is doing, and there's plenty of YouTube videos you can find of people that when they see everyone else doing the same thing in the room, they'll do it even if it goes against their values and their morals, because that's how powerful social conditioning is. It's not popular to challenge the system. It's not popular to not agree with everyone else. Everyone at a certain level wants to be liked. Everyone at a certain level wants to be accepted by society. But this is the thing. If you are buying into that and that is your main desire, you aren't really being yourself anyways, because you're being carried by unconscious forces. So now this is the part of the video that we get practical. What I encourage you to do is to step outside of your own bubble and to start to understand it is okay to be different. It is okay to not think the same as everybody else. It is okay, and you can feel this. Sometimes I'll go out with people, and I'll go out in public, and if there's something that would normally embarrass me, I try to really let that sink in, because I realize that embarrassing, that, not wanting to be around maybe, and wondering if people are judging whatever's going on, or think that people are thinking about us. if we're doing something kind of like, you know, kind of stupid or, you know, just kind of goofy, right? And I kind of will force myself to get into that feeling because I realize that that gap, that negative feeling is coming from social conditioning, the necessity to be liked by everybody else. Now, we step outside of those kind of thought forms, of those bubbles, when we start to think for ourselves. And I think that this is one of the most powerful things we could do, is to start to consciously decide and intend where our life goes, and knowing that we can unplug from the bubble that we've created around ourselves, from the self-image that we have of who we are, breaking outside of those beliefs that we have about who we are. And the only way to really do that is to question where we are and ask ourselves, is this really true? Do I prefer to believe this? And not even is this like necessarily true, but does this serve me? Because at the fundamental level, anything that we believe to be true will always be reflected back to us. So ask, does this belief serve me? Is it productive? Is it efficient for me? And as we start to ask better questions, we'll start to get better answers. We'll see, you know what? Maybe I get a little spike of high when I'm around people and people accept me for doing the same thing that everyone else is doing. And maybe it's not cool to go against the grain. And don't go against the grain, by the way. I used to do this. I used to go against the grain because I wanted to be the rebel. I always had a view of myself of challenging the system. I've always been somebody that was always going for the underdog, for example. Like, if somebody was picking on, if 5, 8, or 8 people were picking and talking shit about one person, I would be the one person that would challenge that, and I would be really cool towards that person. And I'm not saying, you know, I would still do that today. But understand that sometimes I would do it specifically because it made me a rebel and it kind of reinforced that self-image. And that resistance sometimes can let it persist. So just observe it, be aware of it, act on it, but don't be identified too much with it. I guess that's the point I'm trying to say. But understand that what you can do is have more intention in your daily life. You can see the beliefs that you have. You can see what's pulling you in a certain direction. If you see and notice that you have these thoughts of, you know, really being accepted by everyone else, or listening to a certain type of music just because everyone else listens to it, be aware of what that is. And even though it might be relatable, is it really you? Is it really the way you prefer to be? And as you start to see these things, you'll see that maybe before you were just kind of riding on the unconscious tails of those energy, of that momentum. And then you can start to put it in the direction that you want. So realize that you can choose your own experience by having conscious choice in what you do, but understanding that awareness is key, observing rather than reacting. If you resist it, it will persist. If you are fighting the war on drugs, the war on abortion, the war on all of these things, then by fighting it, you are actually letting it stay more alive because you're still fitting within the system. Observe it. Be aware of it. Don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid to go against the grain. Don't be afraid to be yourself. And the more you buy into that, the more you break outside of the thought bubble, the self-image bubble that we've all created for ourselves, and the more that we can actually live the way that we prefer. Now understand, our subconscious mind is running most of our life experience. That how we think, how we act, and how we feel has such a dominant grip over what we experience in our life. And that when we change how we think, how we feel, and how we act, everything begins to change. And that's why I created a subconscious mind MP3 meditation that you can listen to before you go to bed every day. Use it to amplify emotions and to change your self-image for the way you see yourself. That when you do this, everything begins to change. That is something that I'm giving away for free. You can download that just by going to the description box. It's the top thing. You just download it into your phone and you're able to listen to it as you're going to bed every day. And you'll find that doing it consistently every day for the course of maybe the next 2 or 3 weeks, you'll start to feel differently about yourself, you'll start to see yourself differently, and you'll feel like you're really unplugging from that social conditioning. So, with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already. Also, hit that little notification gear next to the subscribe button so that you can see the daily vids that I do. And other than that, as always, I'll see you guys on the next vid. Peace, much love, namaste.